My name is Raimund. I'm a little, I can consider a PowerShell veteran, doing PowerShell since the very beginning. And I am, the co-author of AutomatedLab, pretty active in the DSC community and now getting more and more into AI. I think this is why am I here with Thorsten today.
Yes, so my name is Thorsten Butz, and Raimund and I, we became friends over the years, working together. And now you see beautiful picture from our bike tour in Malmö. You might remember last year. We took the chance to do it on another day where it was not so rainy. So all participants know what I mean, with some issues with the weather. And despite the fact that we became friends, there are still some issues in our relationship because we don't follow the same philosophy in terms of bracing styles. He's that almond style guy, while I heavily believe in one true bracing style. But nevertheless, we made it here, so that's very fine. And yeah, what's the topic today? We want to talk about agentic IDEs and some lessons that we learned. And we want to make it highly interactive. We want to give you a chance to follow along, try some labs. And the nice thing about it is if you watch that later on video, you can always stop it, grab the repository, stuff like that. So thank you, first of all, to all of you who made this possible. And also thank you to the sponsors of this event. If you want to follow along, we have a GitHub repo. We cleaned it up a little bit to make it easy to find those items that we need today. If you watch this later on, you will find out there is much more. We will fill it up with more examples. So it might make sense to watch that again later, to have a look at the repository, some more examples, stuff like that. Right now, we only put those required scripts in it so that it's easy to find what you need for the next steps. Yeah, the agenda for today is, now that everything is up and running, we got 3 chapters. We want to start with a very entry-level talk so that anyone who says, okay, I heard a lot about that AI stuff, about all the IDEs, all the development, but I have not yet found time to fiddle around with that. We want to onboard you with some basic information. And the second chapter will be about AutomatedLab. And the third chapter will be about more or less our own experience. And that can be little bit more challenging. And we are very interested in your opinions. So maybe we'll find the time for Q&A to talk a little bit about your experience, or later on at the floor, at the coffee booth, we will see. The problem with that is, when did we talk about this content?
I think first in autumn to just get a rough idea, and then a bit closer during the Christmas time and winter.
So the main problem is always when we propose sessions for this PSConf next year, it's about just around Christmas, right? And if you think about topics like AI, one thing is for granted. Nothing will be the same within next month time period, right? And nothing will be the same in 6 months. So that's a challenge. And so that leads to the situation that everything is always under construction. And if you watch this video in 1 year, you might think this is a history lesson. That's the nature of it, right? Yeah. But I think you will find something useful in it. Let's start with the main idea. He and Jan Hendrik in the front row, we had a lot of talks about AutomatedLab. And to be honest, despite the fact that I risk my friendship with Raimund, I don't like AutomatedLab, to be honest. But why don't I like it? What's my problem with that? I have very specific problems to be solved. And AutomatedLab, to me, would make a great job for deploying Azure machines, because I had no better solution than AutomatedLab. But the problem is that if you work on Azure, if you work with AutomatedLab, you combine two technologies, and each of the technologies can run into some problems. And it will, of course, take a lot of time to deploy machines. You have runtimes, you have waiting queues, all kind of problems within the one or the other technique. And AutomatedLab does a lot of things that I actually don't need. These days, I don't need Hyper-V deployment because I rarely use it. And the fact that AutomatedLab requires me to run with elevated writes, which is no requirement for me at all when I talk about Azure. It requires that I enable PS remoting and lower my configuration in terms of security. That all creates a little bit of problems. And the experts, the developers might know ways to fiddle around that. But for you, as a regular user, that might not be obvious. So that's the reason why I struggle with AutomatedLab. But your mileage may vary.
Okay, so Jan and I, we still think it's a brilliant tool because it is very, very easy to deploy an easy or a complex lab on Hyper-V, Azure, and end of next week, or end of this week, even on Proxmox. So you don't need to learn the technologies under the hood. We abstract everything. And one very big critique to Thorsten is he didn't manage to support a single issue in about 10 years, right? So if something doesn't work in an open source project, let the community know, let the developers know what's going wrong. And even if you have an error message that is not very precise and does not really tell about the issue, just throw it in. And then you can figure it out with the developers together how to make things better, right? But we all know time is a constraint, so maybe that was the reason. Yeah, we still think it's the best tool to deploy a WinOps lab, right? If you deal with Linux, maybe you have better tools than that. But if you want to have a Windows infrastructure with domain controllers, certificate authority, so all the stuff that you need to kind of mimic your complexity of your production environment, that's a good tool. And we will come back to that later because it's getting more powerful if you combine it with AI.
Yeah, we will talk about that explicitly in chapter 2. There is one question. If you want to have an idea how mature AutomatedLab is, how old it is, you can find something in the slides, right? It's based on an XML configuration. So do you remember when you started with AutomatedLab, in which year?
12 or 11?
Yeah, so that was completely without artificial intelligence, right?
Yeah.
So it was just human intelligence. Okay, let's start with the first chapter. From a beginner's perspective today, what makes it complicated? And I think there are a number of issues. First of all, artificial intelligence is totally overhyped. At least it seems to be like that. You read it every day, all the apocalypse on the newspapers, will go wrong, and all the chances that are in. I'm old enough. I had that kind of revolution before. Think about the millennium when we all became friends with the internet, when the World Wide Web matured. Did you expect that it becomes that big? Today we take that for granted. Or I remember well the famous One More Thing keynote from Steve Jobs when they introduced the first version of the iPhone. Was that overhyped? From today's point of view, I would say it's still underrated. If you think about the combination of the World Wide Web with a smartphone and GPS, think about your pictures that you take with the EXIF information. We can't live without that. So I think at the same level, artificial intelligence is overrated and underrated. We talk too much about it, but in 10 years' time, we will say it will be bigger than we expected it to be. But if you see that strictly from a programmer's or scripter's perspective, the main question is, where do we start? And of course, anyone is used to work with Visual Studio Code. But I think it makes sense to look back in history and think for a second about Visual Studio Code. I think it's quite interesting, and you will find in the slides a little bit more information about the development history. So in a nutshell, Visual Studio Code didn't came out of nothing. The guys that invented GitHub before it was bought by Microsoft, they worked on specific technologies, and one outcome of this was the famous Atom editor. And some guys tried to improve the code of Atom, make it way more faster, and this is what, in a nutshell, you use today, and Microsoft calls it Visual Studio Code. So Visual Studio Code already is a fork, is a child of something else. And the fact that it's open source makes it easy to fork it and create yet another product. And what is, to me, is very important to understand for beginners, we have a lot of solutions that are actually Visual Studio Code, but they have another brand. So try out, if you like it, because this is not marketing for Microsoft, try out Anti-Gravity, try Cursor, try Windsurf. I could go on forever. All these products, most of them are simply Visual Studio Code with some enhancements, customizations by a specific company. I personally that's no recommendation. I just tell you, I'm not working for Microsoft, so I can use whatever I like. I don't get sponsored by my employer. I'm self-employed. I use Cursor most of the time. And if you start it, you will find out this is exactly what you already know. Anti-gravity may be interesting because it comes from Google. We have high hopes that they invest a lot on that. And of course, you can use Visual Studio Code. But Visual Studio Code is not agentic. There is something missing. There is no AI functionality. The AI functionality is added by a kind of extension, an agent that we will talk about a lot today. And in terms of Microsoft's best practice, the agent is GitHub Copilot. Raimund will use it. But there are other extensions, agents, however you call that. For example, Claude, which I will demonstrate in a second, is yet another very famous by Anthropic. We had Klein before.
And by the way, switching from one to the other is a very, very easy task. So they all work the same and they all read the markdown file, so it's not a big deal.
Yeah. And what you need to understand, this is what the slide wants to show, and they are all connected. So the extension is thus just the glue between the editor that you use and the language model that is somewhere. And of course, the language model is more or less the most important thing if we talk about Opus or something like that, or Sonnet. You see a couple of these. These AI models can almost use all over the places, so it really doesn't matter. It's obvious that Anthropic features its own language model. It's obvious that Google features their own language models. The good thing with Microsoft is they don't have a language model, so they feature everything, right? So you're totally free. Yeah. And that might change in the future, of course.
By the way, Phil, a little question here. Who is using Agentic ADI at the moment? Who is generating code using Agentic agents? Most of you. Who has heard about terms like skills, instructions, memory banks? Also quite a few. That's good. Okay. Good.
Okay, we can skip the first chapter, but nevertheless, I guess it will still be interesting. What I can recommend, because I experienced that myself, I always try to find a way to start slowly, to begin with something that's not so overwhelming. And what I personally find out, and again, that's no marketing, I found out that Anthropic does a good job. They have a bunch of videos, they have a bunch of white papers that are written in a very good, understandable way, very good things in terms of entry level, intermediate level, and so on. And Anthropic, this famous competitor to OpenAI, they're constantly fighting who's the best one right now. They have a brand called Claude, and Claude is everything. But in the beginning, it was just a CLI, just a command line. And I just want to show you how that looks to you. So when you install that, you simply have a terminal and you start a binary file. And that allows you to make changes in your current repository. You see, I open up the folder. It asks me if I want to allow it. And then you have these slash commands you see here. And the first slash command is help. And then it displays what it can do. And you see if you, for example, want to run a shell thing, then you simply can escape out of that. The first thing that you like to do is choose a model. Default is Sonnet. As Raimund mentioned, we always try to find out differences in the capabilities, and Opus today is the most expensive thing you can use. If this is the best one, we will find out. What is very important is that you should always try in plan mode, and you will see in a second why. And this in Claude CLI is just /plan. And now, to make it a little bit easier here for me to talk and speak, I already created a prompt that I just copied here. And I want Claude now to create something that we will need in a few minutes. I told Claude, you see that highlighted, can you please create a countdown timer? Because just in a couple of minutes, you will have time for a lab. And we want to show you how much time is left. And now, because I'm in plan mode, Claude doesn't run directly. It asks a few things. So, for example, it's asked, how do you want to display the countdown? And now I chose for full screen mode. And I said, OK, when it's over, just stop the countdown timer. And so it asks a bunch of questions. This is also token saving. We will see that in a couple of minutes. And now it runs, and you see how it works. And we will see the outcome, hopefully, in a second. And what you have always to keep in mind is that if I ask you a question, and I repeat that question tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, I might get different answers from you. So it's non-deterministic. The same is true for the artificial intelligence. You can create the same prompt and you get 3 different outputs. You never know. So it makes sense to do kind of loop, iterate on that, and try again and again and again until you find the perfect solution, of course. And how can that be optimized? We will show you in the 3rd chapter. Now you see what came out. This is a timer. And what you see now, the Claude CLI is testing what I'm doing. And that is, in a nutshell, the biggest difference between just using a smartphone app or a website where you might have a sandbox or not. The Aigentic here, the term Aigentic describes that Claude CLI can use my computer. And it can start the code, can try, analyze it, and repeat it. And now the script is ready. And I can start it, and I do it now. But before I do, I just type in create a Claude MD. You will see in a minute what that is. And now I think we are almost ready to go. So just wait for a second. I escape out of it. Let's just run it. You see I got 2 files now. It's a hidden folder or hidden file with a config, and that is what it created. Nice. I think I can stop it. You will see that again in the lab. So, what is Claude.md? Of course, because this is an Anthropic solution, they feature their own product. But if you think about it, if you think about your first approach with an AI, you might have typed something in on the website. So, and then you add a second question and a third question. What you have to keep in mind is that the artificial intelligence will always push the complete text that you typed in history completely as it would be the first approach. It would put it to the engine. So the more you ask, the longer the context is, the more heavy work is done in the background. And this can be a problem in terms of costs and also in terms of efficiency. So it makes sense that you ask the AI, please, can you do some notes And if I return next time, I open a new chat to start from scratch, and I only give that summary. And that is what, in simple words, is described as a Claude MD here.
Well, that's the poor man's choice of a memory bank. I would never go this way.
Exactly. And we go into more details later on.
Yeah.
What I do like, again, no marketing, no advertisement, just to give you a starting point. What I like is if you only focus on a single vendor, it's relatively easy to get an overview. So in Entropic's case, it's just having a very simple but very efficient language model that is Haiku. And that is perfect for simply something like what we need in coding, auto-completion. That's perfect for that because it's very fast. The general tool for every day, you can try that in the first lab, is Sonnet. And the more advanced thing is Opus, but this is already the most expensive.
And let's open a link here, which demonstrates quite nicely or compares all the available models. And the most interesting chart to me is here at the bottom. I hope it's, oh no, wait a minute. It's not readable.
It's a presentation mode.
Yeah, here we go. So that's the website.
Now you see this?
It's, artificialanalysis.ai. Compares all available models, and down here we have a chart that compares the costs of running these comparisons. And what we can see here is that Opus, the cost for Opus was $4,600 to run this specific tests. Doing the same thing on the best model that we can get for DeepSeek, where's that? It was here. Find it. Here it is. It's just $160. So 4,600 compared to 160 gives you an idea about how different these models are in terms of costs, right? So if you want to choose a certain model, just relate back to that webpage, and it might give you a better clue about what's available and how expensive these things are.
No. Don't do this.
Okay.
Don't do this. Do this. Okay. Yeah, you just saw why I think it makes sense as a starting point to just focus on just a couple of things, to really to not be overwhelmed by the huge amount of possibilities. But in the next step, you are very glad that you have so many opportunities to try different vendors and to try different language models. And that exactly is what leads us to the first lab. And I hope you will enjoy this in a couple of minutes, just for the process. We will give you a very small amount of time to not run into problems, to try something out. So you will see the labs are very, very narrow, right? We don't want to spend too much time on it. So what's a good first lab to try out? Claude CLI, what I just demonstrated, requires a subscription. That's not good for a classroom. So something that I can recommend as an add-on is the Open Router AI platform. Most of you will already heard about that or used that before, because they act as a provider for all the different vendors. You can log in. You need an account, of course. You need an API key. That's what you do in the first lab. And then you can use any model. And it's free. But if it is free, it is super, 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 super limited. But just to try something out, it's perfect. And there is a neat little trick on the right-hand side on the slide. If you top it up with $10, you can still use it free, but you get more in the free subscription. You know what I mean? You're not so limited anymore because they want to encourage you to top it up. And then you also can use the paid models. And the nice thing about it, and that is what you should try out now in the first lab, the nice thing about it is that you can immediately see what it costs. Because in many extensions, sometimes it's harder, sometimes it's easier. It can be very challenging to find out what does this prompt cost me. Sometimes it's easy, and in the Open Router platform, you see this. So the first lab that you should try now is just about using the common web commandlets, invoke REST method, invoke web request. And if you just synced our repo, I would like to try that out, and we will see what you find out, right? It's obvious that there is never time enough. And I saw with great pleasure that lots of you really tried that. And I assume if you just started to create an open router account, see that, check out how can I create an API key, do this with invoke web request, you're on common ground. You all know how to do this. I guess at least 99%. And that will take some time. This workshop is intended also for later usage. So you get a glimpse of what is possible and you can later check that out. Maybe show some colleagues at your company. These are the absolutely basics. So we don't want to challenge you right from the beginning. If you think this is too simple, we did it. It should be simple, right? Because now we go to second gear. It gets a little bit more complicated. But I want to show you what I did during the same, more or less the same exercise that you just did. I created 3 prompts. Yes, I see there are 4 bullet points, but actually there are 3 prompts. I said, I told the AI to solve some problems. Problem number 1, create a PowerShell script that calculates a factorial value. This is a kind of no-brainer, a hello world example that you might have learned 10 years ago when you started with PowerShell, or calculating Fibonacci numbers, something like that. Every artificial intelligence can do that without any problems, right? You will find out. The second thing is a little bit more challenging. Subnetting. Can you give me all the IP addresses within a certain network ID? Something like 10.0.0.0/24. And you know it's easy when you have /24 or /16, but it's a little bit more challenging when you have something like /20, when you come into that area of CIDR. This is way more challenging for us, not so super challenging for an artificial intelligence. You will find out if when I show you the outcome. And the third thing that is split up into 3 and 4, this is something very, very strange. We all heard about monadology, about the monads that Jeffrey Snow presented to us while creating PowerShell. The monadology was created by Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, as you can see here, in the 18th century. And back in those days, scientific papers were written in French. Great that you can understand that. I had Latin on school, so sadly I cannot understand French. Of course, I could use a translated version, but since the artificial intelligence or the language model are capable of almost any languages, I did something that was highly interesting for me. I told the AIs, can you summarize the original code of Leibniz? Can you summarize the book and translate that to my language or to English or to whatsoever? And I did that in 2 flavors. The first thing is I simply provided the URL because this is public domain, this book. You can read it on the web for free. And the second thing is I put the complete book in the prompt, completely. And the outcome was amazing. First of all, factorial, every model can do that. I just limited for demo purposes to the entropic models that I showed you before. And subnetting is definitely way more challenging, as you can see here. Some things failed, but Opus did it. I have to confess that was Opus 4.6 when I first tried this, but so it will likely happen that it can also solve this piece of the puzzle. Yes, and within Leibniz, I struggled a little bit, but if you only focus on the 4th item where I created a prompt that included the complete text, which is a lot of characters, that was my bill for a single request. 1 money unit dot something, so almost €2 for a single request. Do you get the idea why this is important? You should limit your words when you talk to the AI. No problem if you are a token billionaire, just like Microsoft, because he's working for a company that has all the money. But if you're self-employed or do this as a hobbyist, there is a lesson learned, right? So keep your prompts short. And if you have the chance to have a reference for a GitHub repo, just type in the URL. Again, your mileage may vary. We might have extensions that handle that more clever today, but this is just an experience that I had. Let's come back. I need your help, Raimund, because I'm AutomatedLab. That I can't do that. The nice thing about AutomatedLab, you might know this, is it doesn't matter if you use Hyper-V or, take care, if you use Azure, it's almost the same. The only thing that differs are virtualization engine. And of course, in terms of Azure, you have to connect to the Azure word. So that's why I added connect AZ account. And if I go back, you see that it's almost the same, right? And that's the nice thing, well done, about Hyper-V.
Well done, Jan, for Azure. Yeah. So the whole thing was born as an idea to virtualize environments on Hyper-V. And therefore, let's go back, we have this strange name here, Windows Server 2025 Data Center, because this is what the ISO image publishes. Of course, there is nothing comparable in Proxmox or in Hyper-V. So we needed to invent some logic that abstracts all these differences and gives you the same, exactly the same look and feel, except some mandatory thing like connecting to Azure or connecting to Proxmox. And this is kind of a problem that Thorsten faced, right? Because sometimes things don't work as expected. Or first of all, just as a one-slider, what is AutomatedLab, right? You have the possibility not to only spin up single dev machines, like dev containers. Here you have the chance to spin up whole environments. And for that, you can also use the AI to fill it with test data to mimic your complexity, right? So it is just adding a certificate authority or adding a SQL server is just a single line of code, unless you have certain special requirements. So if you want to have a SQL server specialized in a certain way with predefined databases, then it might get 2 or 3 lines, but usually it's just a one-liner. So this gives you kind of a lab as code, and you can remove it and redeploy it in no time at all. That's in a nutshell.
And an underrated problem is that if 2 people try the same code in Azure, it is not the same, because think about something like a location. The resource that you require might simply not be available. Have you thought about that? Why do we so often use the Azure data centers in Amsterdam? Yeah, because they are the biggest. If you try something here in Germany, for example, you might run into constraints because the things you want are not available. And the next thing, you might not talk so open about that. The subscriptions you have are not the same. It depends. If you have a free subscription or if you have an MSDN subscription, that might be limited in terms of what you can request. And we simply tried this with your subscription and with my MSDN subscription, and we found out what you see here below, the last bullet point.
Yeah.
Even in the same region, having the same set of commandlets, we do find a huge number of differences.
We did, yeah. So 242 sizes were missing in Thorsten's subscription. So and surfacing the problems we have in Azure or the shortcomings that a certain Azure subscription have to the surface and giving a really good error message is quite difficult. I think we struggled a lot of times, and then I remember we struggled when Microsoft was just changing the naming in the background without really surfacing this change, and then of course this broke. Yeah.
And the magic behind that all is that the code that Jan-Hendrik wrote. So if you have the pleasure to meet him here on site, you can ask him all the things. If he doesn't know, nobody knows. But the main problem is what you see here. Can you explain what is the main issue here?
So actually, as Thorsten approached me and asked, how does the name Windows Server 2025 Data Center Edition translate into a Azure SKU or whatever, I didn't know either. So Jan Hendrik and I worked on the source code a long time ago, I think 4, 5, 6 years. So it's almost foreign code to us at the moment. And what we now know is that we have certain publishers, we have offerings, we have SKUs, and all this somehow gets merged into something that Azure can use in the background. Let me just go to Visual Studio, because these slides are not so meaningful at the moment. Here we are just explaining how things work, but I think it's more important, how do we find out how things work? And
You have to escape again.
I have to escape the room. I just, this morning, used this little prompt here. Right, here we go. In AutomatedLab, I define an OS to deploy Windows Server 2025 data center.
For the people who watch the video now, pause button, right? So you can read it.
Okay. Even when deploying to Azure, Azure doesn't know about this. How does it work? And then it goes through the code in minutes, or no, seconds, and comes with an answer that is exactly what you see on the slide. So the mapping is hard-coded, you see, using a switch, and so on and so on. We don't need to go into the details, but the lesson here is, if you have code that you have written a couple of years ago, then it's usually a mystery to you. And
or your colleague.
And it's even more a mystery.
Or the consultant.
Yeah.
You know, you get the idea why we named it reverse engineering. It's not so hard as real reverse engineering with binary code, right? That's a science, very hard to learn. But reverse engineering is actually simple. The AI is the best apprentice that you never had. The best friend that just does all the hard work.
Yeah. So, and of course, this can be put into comments into the code. It can be put into a markdown document. You can do whatever you need with the knowledge. And later we will create a skill so that this is kind of preserved for succeeding sessions. Right? Good. So
Shift F5?
Shift F5.
Right.
Yeah. So let's forget the details here. And let's move to something that is more interesting. What does Aigentic even mean? Many of you told or raised the hand when I asked, are you using Agentic coding already? But have you also, let's have a look at the video first, because I think then it's better to explain that. Have you used a prompt like this before? I'll give you a couple of seconds to read that. Because it's not, most people talk about agentic coding, but actually, if I go back a slide, a model is no longer a search box. Agentic means, in a nutshell, it's a junior colleague with shell access. And this means the agent can do whatever you can do with a shell, which is actually everything that can be talked to through an API or through a CLI, right?
You watched when Claude CLI created that script. It does it really, and it starts it, and it likely will fail. And the fun thing is that it recognizes the error, the exception, maybe whatever occurs, and it can learn from that. And that's the magic. That's Agentic.
And here we go. So we choose a model which is pretty fast. We go to the autopilot, so we are not getting stupid questions all the time. And then I just want to have a folder with a certain name. And, I don't care about the name actually, just on drive C and some random files, right? So the lesson behind that is, if you have issues, for example, I had issues with my customer creating new certificates, Project Dagger. And these certificates couldn't be created because a generic error. And usually this is a 2, 3, 4 hour troubleshooting spree to find out what is happening in the registry, in the certificate provider, wherever, right? So because it was lunchtime, I just told the agent, this command doesn't work, try to fix it, and hopefully it's done when I come back from lunch. And it was so. So it found out that in the registry there are some orphaned bits of a previous certificate. He has removed it for me and said, I have already tested creating the certificates, please try yourself and it should work now, right? So these agents are not just for writing code. They do your troubleshooting, they do your file generation, they do everything that you need, but this comes with a big risk, right? Let's go back to the slide. as it says, it cuts both ways. So have you heard about the incident? It was covered in many newspapers also on Disclosed TV. AI coding agent deletes entire company database in 9 seconds. And luckily, the backups of the database have been on the same volume than the production database. And because the agent did not remove just the database, but the whole volume, okay, right? So this was a kind of a disaster. So it only took 9 seconds. And the lesson to learn is here: an agent with shell access and destructive permission acts faster than you can react, right? So we really need to be careful about what an agent is allowed to do. And what is the fix? It's not babysitting. There was an interesting study done at the German flight safety and the American flight safety. So the outcome was that the guys who are observing all the flights have a focus span of up to 20 minutes. And then your brain starts losing the focus because you're only passively monitoring something, not actively. So if you get questions over and over again, if the agent is allowed to do this and that and this, then you might be attentive with the first couple of questions, but then you just press the button because you want to get the job done, right? So the solution is not babysitting, it's isolation. You need to give the agent full access to do whatever it's required to finish the job, but in something that is isolated. And we will come back to that later. That's important, right? So, please.
Yeah.
Nutshell, the agent can do anything for you, and coding is just a small aspect. So, for example, I have some a little legal issue at the moment, and what we did is get all the emails, all the contracts into one single Git repository, let the agent convert it into Markdown so it's indexable and readable, then create a memory bank to tell the agent, okay, what's the purpose of the project, what should be the final outcome, and then let it just do its work. So it knows better about law and about my rights and my duties than most of the expensive lawyers.
Think about the Leibniz example. You want to find a certain quote in the book. You read it once or you heard that it exists, but you want to go through the complete book, even if you can't speak French? Just tell the AI, where is that quote, where it talks about that, and a good chance is you find it. Now that you're in the first lab, you did it really bare metal, with invoke web request or invoke REST method, but that's not the way you want to work. And Claude CLI, what I just showed you, is pretty nice, but that's not the solution we want to work with, because we want to have a proper editor. It can be Visual Studio Code or any of the folks or anything else, Forks or anything else. You can have a subscription with GitHub Copilot. I don't mind. You can use anything you like. You can also use OpenRouter AI, but there's a little trick that you need to know that Raimund will show you. How can I configure Visual Studio Code to just use the OpenRouter AI key? That's it. Also, but you should watch here so that you see.
Yeah. So all you need to do is, you see no model available, and if you type in prompt, then that's the answer. Nothing works, and the only thing you have to do is use your GitHub account to connect the Copilot with GitHub. Even if you want to use OpenRouter, you have to obviously use GitHub first to get the first connection or the authentication. I don't know exactly why this is necessary, but you have to. And afterwards, of course, the GitHub models work. And if you want to configure the OpenRouter, it's a little bit hidden. So here we are creating the API key.
We'll dance and we'll sing till the dark night is gone.
You know this stuff.
Copy. Yeah, pretty easy. And then
we go back to Visual Studio Code.
And this is by the same procedure you need to use if you want to use an Anthropic subscription with Claude.
And then you can type in the API key, as you see. And now you have all the different models.
A vast selection.
Yeah. And you will find out you will not run out of budget. If you use that, of course.
I think in this demo I already ran out of budget. Even if I have chosen the free model, but I'm not an expert with OpenRouter.
Yeah, that's it. But it tells you don't have no more money, right? But you can top up that. Why do we focus on that? It's not taken for granted, as I said before, that you have that huge subscription that your employer pays for you. You might do this at home, fiddling around with the Raspberry Pi, stuff like that. You can. So you yourself should educate yourself, and that's one thing you can do.
Or what Jan just showed is, what model do you run locally? Quencoder. So his notebook computer is not state of the art, is it? Not the most recent model. Okay, anyway, if you want to host the model locally, Jan has successfully did it. And the results he got from the local model were even better, or at least comparable to what the big ones produce. So that's also a very cost-effective alternative.
Okay, so it's time for the second lab. And just to make a little jump in time forward, the third lab, you might remember we have 3 chapters and 3 labs. We knew that this will not fit into 19 minutes. Of course, it will not. So the third lab is more or less kind of homework. So we're here in good shape. We'd like to give you 10 to 15 minutes now for the second lab. I stop talking. And the second lab is about use whatever agentic AI you like. Whatever you like, you can use Visual Studio Code, you can use the Open Router key that you just had, you can install anti-gravity, windsurf, whatever you like, and try to solve the puzzle, answer the questions, let the AI answer the questions that you see in Lab 2. And I stroll around and try to help you. Okay, so we go on in 15 minutes. So this was lab 2. And the main question here was, does the AI robot find a way to work cost saving, to make it a little bit less expensive? And what I found out is artificial intelligence very often proposes something like something like a bastion host. This is, in general terms, a good idea, but it is way more expensive. So that would still not solve that problem that I actually want to lower the costs. And having 3 VMs would usually mean I have 3 public IP addresses if I do this the simple way. And does anyone find a proper solution? Let's talk to the audience. You said you find a nice proposal on how to do this cost saving.
Yeah, I just said that we could use a load balancer. That would be cost efficient if you have, so you would save the cost for one of the public IP, or you could just use one and then just jump between the servers. That was another suggestion. But mostly it talks about, because the savings are minimal, the big savings is focusing on the VM. So using spots or auto shutdown after hours and stuff like that. So that was what it primarily talked about, because I said cost optimization was the primary focus.
Yeah. So thank you. We could talk a lot more about that, but I think I made the same experience that you just summarized. Artificial intelligence will not find the best solution without help, but just pointing them to AutomatedLab. That was my personal experience, and this is the same thing that you just found out, and you explained it, is AutomatedLab knows about a technique that's a load balancer, and that simply does a port redirection. And you always use the public IP of the load balancer, and from there on, you are redirected to the first machine, the second machine, the third. So you just change the TCP port. And we talk about the lab environment. We don't talk about security too much in this context. This is what came out here. Great. Thank you for this. And if you find the time, try this later on. We will put a lot of add-ons, a lot of more examples into this. So, and now it's time to raise the level yet again. And now I want Raimund to talk a little bit about his experience, because he is a token billionaire, and just hand it out to him.
Okay, first of all, as Jeffrey said in his talk, Jeffrey Nova, right? The next year we need to fasten the seatbelts because changes are even more rapidly than this year. But my job has changed in the last 6 to 9 months completely. So my output has increased, I would say, by 20, by 30, by 40. And I've learned also how to test whatever the output is and to put it in guardrails so that it can be used as artifacts in productive environments. Not everybody's happy about the shift. But so far it feels very productive, but also very exhausting because you have huge context switches in between the projects, and you have sometimes agents running for a couple of minutes, too little time to do something else. Sometimes they run for hours or days, which is then of course more productive. It really depends, but it's a very, very hard shift in how we deal with stuff. First of all, what is a token? A token is the smallest amount of data that the model can handle. Why is it important? Costs, right? So this lab 2 was all about costs on the Azure side, but of course we need to keep these costs also, the AI costs also in perspective. The amount of tokens you can store in your short memory is the limit to how the model can reason, right? You have all heard about the context window. The context window usually has a size between 200,000 and 1 million tokens. And if it's full, the AI comes out with some weird ideas and loses track. So that's important to deal with tokens effectively.
Yeah, and me being a teacher in my first life, when I was studied, I learned a term that I remembered. It's morpheme. If we talk about our natural language, we can split up a sentence, for example, into the tiniest bit that carry an information. That is what we call in linguistics a morpheme. And I think that's a good comparison, right? Think about a token is kind of a morpheme in our natural language. That's what I wanted to show you.
Interesting fact. Yeah, interesting side note. So from chatting to engineering, and what we definitely want to do is not naively burn tokens and produce just code. We need to focus very much on how we produce the code and use the right tools and the right methodologies. And this will be our next chapter, how we can control the AI and how can teach the AI so that the output is according to the guidelines that we have established as a team, as an individual, or as an enterprise. And the big difference between vibe coding and engineering is just discipline, right? So you can do vibe coding still with all the best tools if you don't test your outcome and if you have not a real idea about what the outcome should be. And this will bring us to a term called spec-driven development, right? So you need to put much more time into map and write your intent. What is the project that you're currently working on intended to do? What are the acceptance criteria? What is the test measurement? How can you what are the constraints and the dependencies in your enterprise environment, right? So this needs to be all well laid out. And first, in the vibe coding way, we just prompt the agent generates code, then you have a huge diff sometimes of a couple of 100 lines that you have to go through and identify if this difference is really what you need and is making your code better or even worse, right? And then usually you hope it matches the intent. Of course, you can test it. Of course, you can even add pasta tests. But is the intent really what has been met by the code? This is a totally different question that no pasta test can really answer, right? So what we want to do here is we are writing the spec. The agent produces a plan. And then, if we go this way, the code becomes just an implementation detail. The spec is what you deal most of the time with and that you change manually. And the outcome is the code that hopefully matches the spec. And if it matches the spec, is something that the AI can map and test as well. So if the AI has no idea about the spec and you are just requesting, for example, a subnetting function, of course it will return something that works. But is it really what you need? Does it fit into the project scope? Is it working in terms of parameters and the output value, right? So if the AI knows the intent, then the subnetting function would have the right pattern for input and the right pattern for output to exactly fit in the space that you have reserved for it. That's very important. Yeah. Good. And another very interesting quote: you have to invest in the design of the system every day, into the design, right? Make sure that the design of your system, the specs, really meet what your internal or external clients expect. And then we have test-first development. Who has ever really adopted test-driven development? Right. It's more an ideology or a religion, right? We know it would be better to do that, but it simply doesn't work because writing tests is way too hard, costs too much time, and makes you feel a little bit unproductive. So now we have a different paradigm or a shift in how we work. Now you don't need to take care about the code anymore because the code is done by the AI. So you have much more time to take care about other stuff. So of course you can do or work on a couple of projects in parallel, which would be what your employer maybe expects because the AI frees time so you can replace a couple of other positions. But what we rather would need to do and recommend is invest time in testing. And you need to write the tests. Because have you heard about the cheating agent trap? Yeah, this happens very often. So you let the AI write code. You let the AI also write the tests for the code. And then the AI uses the same kind of vibe to do both testing and creating the code. And of course, then the whole the same implementation details that go wrongly into the code also go into the tests. And sometimes I faced an issue when you ask the AI, okay, this test doesn't work anymore or doesn't work, please fix it. And what it did is it just removed the test. This was not exactly what I wanted to have happen, right? So make sure that you really focus on the test and that you use the time that you have been now available to your disposal and looking closer on tests and write them, especially the integration tests by yourself. I know unit testing is something very special, and I have always trouble really finding the right way to write a unit test. But an implementation test or a production test should be something that is our task, right? And then we have also a very interesting quote: don't outrun your headlights. Now we have the chance to write code in a very, very fast pace. But if the code has no testing model behind, then things go wrong, right? So you need to keep in mind how long your test cycle takes. And this test cycle should usually control how many lines of code the AI is being able to produce and then also to control. Good. And what is very important are these 4+1 concern. So you guys said, or some of you said, that you're using a memory bank as well, right? Just a short question. How does a memory bank in your organization look like? Is it just one file? Is it a certain procedure that you have learned from somewhere? How did you... Or maybe we understood different things when we talked about memory bank. So Thorsten referred to a memory bank as the Claude MD file. It's just one single file that contains a bit about what the chat history is, right? A memory bank is not the chat history. It can be also the chat history. But if we have a look in one of my projects, let's open another Visual Studio here. I think this is a really big game changer. Let's take this one. So then the memory bank contains the files that tells the AI what this project is about. So this is usually in the project brief. How can I close this one here? Right. And the project brief is just, as the name says, what is this about? Then you have a progress MD. So what is happening or what has accomplished so far and what are the next tasks that we need to do, right? Then you have an active context. Active context is one of the most important files that also regularly needs to be cleaned up. What are we currently working on, right? If you start a new chat, then the AI needs to understand what are the current do's and don'ts, what are the parallel work streams, what do we need to keep in mind, right? So a memory bank is much more than just a flat file. At the end, it's a flat file, but a combination.
Keep it open for a second. Sorry. And just for those who are pretty new to the topic, this is all Markdown, right? So the interesting thing here is that this is semantic, right? The robot can read and understand that's a headline, that's a second level headline, that's the code. And that makes it so powerful that we focus now on Markdown as a kind of computer language to exchange information.
Yeah. So if you want to start with a memory bank, you don't have to write the stuff by your own. What you do is, like the subnetting module Thorsten wanted to write, right? You tell the AI, okay, I'm going to write a module in PowerShell that handles subnetting and all the adjacent tasks. Please start with writing a memory bank so that we all have a common understanding about what the outcome should be. And then the memory bank is your kind of companion, your long-term memory that grows and grows and grows. And in certain time, it will be also cleared because maybe you have accomplished a task and then it's no longer relevant, right? And another memory bank that you have intrinsically is your Git history. If you write well-formatted commit messages, not like we did in AutomatedLab, but well-formatted commit messages, then of course the AI can read the history and derive what happened in the project. That's the second kind of memory that you have.
Think about it when later on the videos from the conference show up in YouTube. Think about a brief summary in the description of the video. And before you start watching the 1 hour video, you can have a look at it. Is that the content that I expect? Because the title might not be as explicit. And this is a memory bank.
Yeah.
It's a concise summary.
So that's important. Then we have skills. Skills teach the AI how to do a certain thing. Please. No. So the question is a memory bank a generic approach or Windows specific? It's generic. It's actually was invented by cloud engineers. So the Anthropic engineers needed to find a way to keep the brain active over a longer period of time, and this is their idea. So it has nothing to do with Windows. Yeah. And everything we are discussing here has nothing to do with Windows except AutomatedLab, right, as the sandbox.
The nice thing about all of this is the names of the files might differ. So, of course, if you use any other product, it might not be named Claude MD, but they all recognize that. And it's very easy to hand out the files that you have from another project or maybe from the website from any vendor and just tell the AI, hey, can you use that? And then the AI will customize that with their own file names. I did that a couple of times. That is absolutely no problem. Just tell the AI, this is my skill, and it will align this with the folder structure as it needs. No need to do it on your own. It's a de facto standard, despite the fact that most of these things are either invented by OpenAI or Anthropic or whoever.
So then we have skills. Skills are on-demand capabilities that are loaded into the context window when needed. And we will talk about skills in detail in a second. Agents are kind of the job description. In which kind of mode is your agent working? What is it allowed to do? What is the methodology? What are the processes, right? This is all defined in the agent. So if you hire someone, a junior apprentice, like what an agent actually is, this junior apprentice needs to get a little job description. And that's the agent, right? And what is an agent? A markdown file. That's it. And if you have a very specific requirement for an agent, who is writing that? The AI as well. So last week, a friend of mine who was working for the oil and gas industry wanted to kind of test out what AI can do in this very specific field. And we just told the AI, okay, this guy is working in the oil and gas industry. These are his tasks to do. This is his job description. Come up with an agent that defines his do's and don'ts, his references to procedures, to legal requirements, and so on. It was a 1,000-line document that matches exactly what he does every day. So you can, for all these stuff, use the AI to create it. It's not up to you. And instructions are auto-applied according to a file filter, which means these are the policies that you can inject. And we are in a PowerShell conference, so one policy that every organization using PowerShell should have is a coding guideline. How do you do the bracing, right? Is it almond style or is
it?
Yeah. So this goes into the instruction. Approved verbs goes into the instructions. How do we deal with parameters? How do you want them to be defined? And again, this is nothing that you have to write by yourself. What you can do is tell the AI that please do a thorough web research, give it 2, 3, 4 references for starters, and tell it to extract all the best practices and put it into an instruction document. You're done, right? It's about 1,000 or 1,500 lines of code, not of code, of Markdown, and it comes almost for free, just a bunch of tokens.
Yeah.
Right.
To summarize this, to finish this in the next minute, you might all know this best practices guidelines for PowerShell developers. I simply showed the AI the URL of the website with the best practices and told the AI create a rule set or an instruction set. Instructions very often also called rules, and you can attach that to your editor, and all of a sudden it will never use double quotes again, right? It will never use write host again. In my code, it doesn't work because in my instructions, I explain that write host is bad, don't use it. Double quotes are only for expanding variables, so don't use that.
And it can go up to a level where you have instructions that are applying to literally every file. Here we have a post-flight and a pre-flight. And the post-flight, for example, tells it that mandatory is verify the change, update the memory bank. What is a memory bank worth for if you forget updating it, right? So it's very important that for every transaction, the memory bank is updated. Good. So back to the slide. This is not a feature, or this is not kind of optional. These are the 4 building walls that the AI is grounded on, right? If you don't do these kind of practices, your result will be definitely not as expected, especially in the long term. Good.
A skill MD, if you want to take one information out of the room, skill MD, this is very, very important. If you ever worked with a technique just like Hugo or something like that, you know what a Frontmatter is. And the brief information is
Yeah, I will show it again. But in a larger, here we go.
That's not a good idea, but anyhow. The main idea of a skill is that the AI only reads the Frontmatter. And that's token saving. And only if you trigger that skill, so if you mention a keyword that's in the Frontmatter, then it loads the complete skill. That's the idea. That is token saving. It's very efficient. And that's why skills matter. So if you take one thing out of it, care about skills.
Let's have an idea what the difference is. So if we do where's a skill? Yeah, here. This reads the whole skill that tells the AI how AutomatedLab works, and we end up with 12,000 tokens, right? So 12,000 tokens is what each prompt will send to the AI, and the AI needs to process this, which costs money, right? So just reading the Frontmatter means that the AI only needs 120 tokens to understand what skills are available, and then we load them if we require them, right? But not the other way around. So this is why Frontmatters are very important. The Frontmatters need to be precise to tell the model what the skill is about and when to load it. Right. And same, by the way, with agents. So if we go to the agent folder and read an agent or all the agents, then you see having an agent comes with a cost. So these are the tokens that are required to inject the agent into the AI. But of course, the outcome is then of a much higher quality. So it's always a compromise between cost and quality.
You will find all the code within the repository. Not yet, because for simplicity, we removed everything that we not need today. But when you later on see the video, you will find it.
And if you have a look at the Claude guidance how to create skills, then the skill MD with the Frontmatter is still not containing all the information. The skill contains general guidance, and the guidance then references to other Markdown files. So we are splitting up skills into smaller chunks to make it more efficient and allow the AI to load on demand, right? Just as a little reference here. Good. Sandboxing, right? We talked about that. Setting up VS Code in a virtual machine is very easy. Of course, wait a minute, that was the mouse. And if you have internet access or you need internet access in the virtual machine, installing or activating the Copilot is very easy as well. And then your Copilot has access to the whole environment. If So the blast radius is the most important thing here. It's just the lab. So if you are screwing the lab, no problem. You can just remove it and start again, right? So give the agent all the freedom it needs to do to complete your software package in an environment that is as at least a little bit as complex as your production environment. And by the way, AI helps you setting up test data, right? You can do, for example, Active Directory. You take an LDIF export, just maybe the first 1,000 users, or maybe even 100 users from your production environment. You strip off the data that you definitely don't want to go into a test environment, and then you tell the agent, please create 10,000 users matching the pattern that we find here, right? And then it does it. So even creating test environments is something, and filling them up is something that works completely automatically. Right. Good. Kind of wrapping it up. So the 360 workflow mental model. Of course, it's all about cost, but on the other hand, it's also about quality. So you don't want to always choose the cheapest model and only focus on cost, because the efficiency and the productivity you get out of this is really mind-blowing sometimes. So this is why you need to kind of control the outcome, and the outcome means define the spec, create a memory bank so the AI can have a picture of the work on the long term, right? Define skills. And by the way, if you find yourself struggling and fighting with the AI to get something done and it doesn't work out, and after a day or two you finally got to the point where things work, what do you do then? You tell the AI, hey, we've learned quite a lot in the last 4 days or 2 days. Let's make a skill out of it, so that it extracts all the information from the chat and puts it in a markdown file for later use, right? Then agents and instructions, of course, as well. And then, of course, tester tests to verify and execute the stuff in a test environment. Not just rely on tester tests, run an integration test, and then you start the cycle again, change the spec according to the outcome, update the memory bank, and so on. Right? And all this is, by the way, documented in the agentic operation model, and all the skills, instructions, and agents for a PowerShell-ish Windows world is in the Copilot Atelier, which is the stuff that I use every day in Extend as well. And by the way, know what you're doing. Very important. So I've heard from talks here with people that now also the absolutely PowerShell noob is creating very well formatted and very good scripts. I'm not so sure about this, right? So if someone writes code with an AI and has no capability and no knowledge to review and the code and to put it into a kind of release life cycle, then things go wrong and you're creating technical debt, or even something that is worse than technical debt, because you have code that nobody knows that it exists, right? So
we have a final picture for that.
Yeah.
Our last slide. So what we said before, this is meant for homework, because it was totally clear that we will never have enough time, even if we do that for 5 days. So the third lab is about creating skills, and we highly encourage you to do this. Artificial intelligence for programmers or scripters is totally underrated, despite the fuss that everybody feels, everybody's talking about that. It's always annoying, but I guess it's still underrating. So the luck in our lifetime is we are living inside a revolution, and that creates so much positive energy. You just have to use it the proper way. And the final picture that I was talking about is what you just said. What does that mean? I'm pretty sure most of you know this guy. He's the only one that does not play an instrument, right? He's the conductor. Who is the best musician in this room? Very likely Herbert von Karajan. You know what I mean? And if I would tell you, let's say you have children and they say, I want to be the next Herbert von Karajan, the next big conductor, but I don't want to learn an instrument. We don't need that anymore. Keep that in mind. If you want to be a conductor, you have to learn an instrument. And just because the translators today are so good, it's time to learn another natural language, Italian, Spanish, something else, because you need the capability to do the conducting. That is what perfectly wraps up what we want to show you.
Yeah.
So
knowledge about software release life cycles, DevOps, pipelining, automated testing, this is all the stuff that you need much more now than writing the most performant PowerShell script and all the bits and pieces.
That's it. And we start a 3.5 days long Q&A. Ask now, ask in 1 hour, ask whenever you meet. Hope you enjoy this a little bit. Do we have questions that you want to be answered right now? Take your time. I know it's been a long run. And get us outside. Yes, please. Yeah, that's a perfect question that I would hand out to Raimund. The question was, how much faster do you work? I summarize that. And how much work goes into conducting? And how much music can be heard? Can you tell a little bit about your token billionaire thing? How much tokens do you burn? And how much more are you productive in your job?
There are days when I burn 200 to 500 euros per day. Okay, but this means that multiple agents run in parallel and save me weeks, if not even months of time. So I remember I work in a military installation where we needed to install SCCM using DSC. And the whole installation model is not compatible with the latest version of SCCM. So just finding out the bits and pieces to get this working would have cost me a week. And I'm not an SCCM expert anyway. So the AI solved this in 3 days of unattended time. I'm not sure exactly how much tokens I burned here, but it was at least a week of time that I got, right? And the investment was just the tokens, but from a time perspective, just a short prompt, right? That's it.
So the question is, do you do more or do you have simply less work?
Yeah. I think, but this problem isn't new. If you free up time by being very efficient with your work, use the freed up time of at least 50% of the time to improve your skills, to learn more, to review your work, to look into the future. What? Definitely, yeah. So there is an interesting talk, and maybe you need to reference this, about job hollowing and the mental burden AI puts on you. Especially if you have multiple agents running, then you have big context switches that are sometimes in the evening. I haven't done much. I've just talked to the AI, but I feel like having done a marathon, right? So it's definitely a very different job that we had before. Sometimes you feel like being a manager, right? You have a technical team of 10 people, and you need to tell them what to do, and they are all a little bit unexperienced. And I think this is not the easiest job. So it's demanding, and sometimes you are also getting crazy because one of these agents simply doesn't want to do what you expect it to do, right?
Many people tell you that talking to the AI doesn't really feel like working or programming, but think about that. Think about the early days when we had the dip switches to handle out some instructions to the computers, to the very early computers. And then we had assembler code. And then we had C. And then we had editors with IntelliSense and autocompletion. And if you go through this era, I'm pretty sure any developer who constantly worked in the early days with assembler code, they would tell you, oh, C, that is cheating.
Yeah.
For the noobs. And those guys who did a lot of C programming or Fortran or whatsoever, and they see modern development environments where everything is auto-completed, they say, that's not programming, that's cheating.
They love it, PowerShell.
So why not accept Markdown as the next level programming language? It is. I'm pretty sure that Mr. Gruber had no thought what he did when he invented Markdown, but maybe that's the simple truth. Markdown is the next programming language.
Software 3.0. Yeah.
More questions? Anyone's hungry? So again, we do thank you. This is the beginning of Q&A. Get us outside, and we hope you get something useful out of it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.